50,000 people. There are really 50,000 people looking at this thing. It makes me want to run away and hide, really. It's very difficult because actually when you're speaking, you speak as if you're speaking to one person. So what I'm really doing, if I can do it right, is to speak to every single one of you, and then you're not 50,000, you're just one. And that's the way you should speak to someone anyway, is one to one. But it's also important to say something that's important to me. And why am I doing this? Why should I bother to speak to you? Why should you bother to listen? And the reason really is not this book, but it's about books. It's about reading books. And I discovered when I was little, something that I really loved doing was getting into a story. Now, I didn't care how that story was. I didn't know if it was in a comic book, brilliant. If it was in a film, brilliant. It didn't matter. In a book, if the book was good, brilliant. And I loved listening to stories. And also I loved telling stories. And I was really good as a small child at doing something which I know none of you do, which is telling lies. I was really good at telling lies. And what are lies? Lies are stories. I know you're not supposed to tell lies, but actually if you put them in books, that's fine. So what I decided I would do when I became a teacher is I would try telling these sort of story lies to the children in my class. And I loved telling stories. And then I loved writing stories. And so really the reason I'm talking to you now is that I would love you also to love stories as much as I do, because it's made my life happier, and that's rather important. Well, each of the stories, whether it's the butterfly lion or it's the kites are flying or Alone on a Wide, Wide Sea, with me they all have a beginning that's true. There's something real behind each one. So for instance with the butterfly lion, it was the discovery, sitting in a train by accident, looking at a book that I had bought by chance about white lions. I bought it because I didn't know there were such things as white lions, and there I was reading this book and looking at these photographs of white lions, and the train stopped and I looked out of the window near a place called Westbury in Wiltshire, and there was a white horse, a huge great white horse carved out across the hillside, as big as a house, right the way across the hillside. So I'm looking at my book and I'm looking white lion in my book, and then looking out the window and I see a white horse carved on the hillside, and so I'm thinking somehow in a story, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a white lion carved in chalk on a hillside? Wouldn't that be interesting? So that's that. Well, the kites are flying. I heard a really sad story about a kid on the West Bank in Palestine, occupied by the Israelis, that part of Palestine where the Palestinians are living, but the Israelis are there, and there's a conflict going on between the two peoples. I mean, really, the situation there is that there's a land which the Israelis and the Palestinians are trying to share together, and they're finding it very difficult, and they're fighting one another. And it's gone on and on and on, and it's very bitter, it's very angry, and lots of people are suffering. And what had happened was that I think a little kid was chucking stones at soldiers, or I have no idea exactly what happened, but at some point there was a child who was shot by a soldier, and he was at the time flying a kite. And I thought that was one of the saddest things, because to fly a kite is the most innocent thing, wonderful time a child is having, just looking up, and then suddenly your life ends with a bullet. And I thought it symbolised the horror really of what's going on there. And then I discovered that, as we know, there's a wall being built around the Israeli settlements. Now this is to protect them. They're building it to protect themselves against the people out there who are trying to attack them. So this is not a one-sided conflict. There are two sides going on here. And I thought, well, to look out for wherever you are, from your settlement if you are an Israeli, or from the field if you're a country Palestinian shepherd person, and you're looking, and what you see is this wall carving through your land. How sad that is. And then I thought, well, maybe you could have children on either side of this wall who would communicate with each other, want to communicate with each other. Maybe they would. And certainly the only way to do that is through kites flying over the top. And I do believe, I'm quite optimistic as a person, that at the end of the day all these terrible things that happen in the world will have an ending. And the people who will end the war and end the fighting are always the children of the people who are there doing the fighting now, because in the end it will end. There will be children of these Israelis and children of the Palestinians who will work out a way to live together, as indeed has been done to a great extent in Ireland, as certainly has been done in South Africa. It will happen. So it's a book, it's a very positive book about the ending of this conflict, really. With Alone on a Wide, Wide Sea, very different sort of thing. It was a piece I read in a newspaper, a true story, a dreadful story, of how after the Second World War, when there were a lot of children, I mean thousands upon thousands, who had no home, or they weren't wanted, or they were orphans, and they were in orphanages, and the government didn't really know what to do with them. So I think through the various charities, and Bernardo's was one of them, they decided, well, why don't we send these children somewhere where they're going to be wanted, where there are families who want to bring up these children, rather than being in children's homes all their lives. And so this sent them off, made arrangements and sent them off in great big liners, 2,000 at a time, to Australia primarily. And when they got to Australia, some of them were looked after perfectly fine. They went into lovely families and it was great. However, for some of them it was a most dreadful time, because they ended up, some of them, being used almost as slaves on farms and treated really, really badly. And this was all those years ago, and it's only now, all these years later, that the people who've now grown up, and of course are my age, because I'm a sort of war baby as well, who are telling the stories about the dreadful time that they had as children growing up in these places in Australia. And in fact the government has just apologised to these people, because they were traumatised and they did have a terrible time. It's just apologised for doing what they did to these children. And about time too.